Hi, in the last demonstration, we looked at how we could continuously deliver individual microservices components that make up a broader application. In particular, we looked at an integration microservice number one that was already deployed, and then we used a Helm release pipeline in Jenkins and microclimate to deploy an integration microservice 2. And we were able to test that individually. And you could imagine how a developer could run a test, they could change the code and retest again very, very rapidly. Deployment's about 15, 20 seconds. Okay. In this example, we're actually going to look at using a Helm release to deploy a full microservices application that happens to have two microservices, the two that we've tested previously, actually deployed as part of that single deployment. Okay, so our microservices are our microservice number one and microservice number two, which are based off of our standard operating environment, which has our Ubuntu, ACE 11, MQ client, fixed configuration. Okay, with fixed configuration being our liveliness probe. So it's present in every single container, every single time. And then we have our individual pieces of code running as individual microservices that have been developed by our developer or developers. Okay, so our starting point will be to actually take a look at our Helm release pipeline source, which is held in GitHub. Okay, so on my GitHub organization, we have all of the collateral to actually set up all of these demos and have this full environment available to you on IBM Cloud Private. Of particular interest for us today is our ACE on ICP integration microservice application Helm release. Okay, so if we take a quick look at our source here, we have, unsurprisingly, a Jenkins file, which is going to give us a name that we're going to deploy our Helm release as. And we can go take a look at the structure of this. So we have a set of Helm charts, okay, which are for microservice number one. And we can go take a look at what makes it microservice number one, okay, and we can see that it's using this base image, which has been built and exists upon the system. This is just a Helm release pipeline, okay? Our developers and our administrators, as they go through their test of microservice one, have been pushing the image for that microservice onto Cloud Private, okay? In our subcharts folder, very, very similarly, we have our second integration microservice. Okay, and we can see that's using a different image held on the repository. Again, microservice number two has been developed by a developer, pushed up through to administrator, who has pushed that through onto ICP and done some individual testing and satisfied himself that that microservice works fine. Okay, this particular pipeline is going to deploy both of them together. Okay, so those are the base artifacts that we're dealing with. Here's our pipeline. So we've got a number of them, as I said earlier on. These were the build for microservice number one pipeline individually, the build for microservice number two individually. We saw in the earlier demo using the pipeline to actually do a Helm release for one or the other. And now we're actually got our pipeline that will deliver the full microservice application based on the two integration microservices. So that's set up in microclimate, okay. And we can see we're using that Git repository, and we've got a pipeline name. If we go and look at our pipeline in Jenkins, we can see I have all of my pipelines here up and running, all nice and happy. But here's my Helm application pipeline. It's been run once before, okay, but we can go and look at IBM Cloud Private. We can see our container images on board, but if we go and look at Helm releases, you can see that I've cleared up any Helm releases that may have been there. Okay, so let's go back to our pipeline, okay, and let's then go and initiate our build. So we'll schedule a build. and we see build number 2 start. We can follow that through by following the console log, and we'll actually see that build go through. It's actually really quite quick because the images are pre-pushed. Okay, so we're straight through, and that's our Helm release underway. Okay, so if we go back to our picture, remind ourselves what we're actually doing. In this particular example, I'm deploying my application and it's 2 integration microservices. Okay, each has 2 additional replicas, so there's 3 actual instances of it running, with an ingress which is actually going to do the load balancing for us. I haven't actually deployed, in this particular example, any business application microservices. We're just deploying the 2 integration microservices. Okay. So if we go back and take a look to see if we've got any Helm releases up and running yet, give that a refresh. And there's our Helm release. Okay, let's go take a look at it. We can see we've got a deployment of 2 microservices across a number of pods, should be 6. Okay, so we're very highly available, all up and running, and we can go take a look at our services. Okay, so let's go take a look at microservice number 1. And we'll go across to his web UI. And we have our standard operating environment deployed liveliness probe. And then we have our microservice number 1 running. Okay, if we go back to our Helm release. And this time we'll take a look at number 2. And we'll just go and check what he's got deployed. Again, we can bring up his web UI. He's got his standard operating environment with his liveliness probe, and he has microservice number 2 deployed. So we're looking good. Okay, let's give some of this stuff a quick test. So let's go back and just grab our microservice number 1, and I want to get the HTTP server address. So the easy way to do that here is just to click on that and grab that piece there. Okay, and if we go over onto our liveliness probe, pop that in. Okay, so we've got our ingress point plus our port number for the liveliness probe on the microservice number 1 node, and we should be able to give that a test and see that we've got back a response from our ACE server with a timestamp associated with it as well from microservice number 1. Okay. Now, what we can do next is we can give the microservice itself on that node a test. So we should just have the same ingress point. Looking at microservice number 1, and let's give that a test. We've got different parameters because we're not calling the liveliness probe, but let's give it a test and see what happens. Okay. Interestingly enough, we called microservice 1 and we got a response from microservice 2. Now the reason for that is we designed the 2 microservices to work together. So basically integration microservice number 1 calls integration microservice number 2, or one of its replicas, and is actually integration microservice number 2's response that gets passed all the way back. The reason we've done this is we want to introduce Istio at some point such that we can do the interaction between microservices independently. At the moment, we're actually doing it by using a naming convention and the Kubernetes DNS service such that the replicas and the services can find each other. But Istio would be a better way, and we do plan to implement that. Okay, So that is actually showing you we call microservice number one, and we're actually bouncing through both microservices before we come back. Okay. So what we've actually done, we've done a single Helm release using a pipeline, and we've managed to deliver 2 integration microservices based on 2 containers, both of which were pre-pushed and built based upon a standard operating environment. Again, when we're working in this way, you can see how we could change microservice number one, microservice number two, go and do our tests independently, okay, using an independent pipeline to just deliver one microservice or the other, do our testing. When we're happy, our deployment and packaging manager will use his Helm release to roll out a new copy of the application. And you've seen we can roll these applications out in just a few seconds. Okay, if we go back and look at our actual pipeline, we should see last duration 25 seconds. So you can see how this can fit into continuous delivery when we start to use these DevOps pipelines. Thanks.